Sarah Bennett held the gun with shaking hands, staring down at the man who had beaten her for 8 years. One bullet. That's all it would take. 8 years of bruises, broken bones, and terror could end with one squeeze of the trigger. Jack's voice cut through the silence. If you pull that trigger, you become the thing you survived. She lowered the gun. You're not worth the bullet, she whispered. And you're not worth my soul. But this story didn't start in a mine shack with a gun. It started 3 weeks earlier on a street in Copper Bend, Montana, where a woman knelt in the dirt bleeding while 37 people watched and did nothing. Sarah Bennett's knees hit the dirt of Main Street so hard she tasted blood. Her husband Nathaniel's boot was already pulling back for the next kick right there in broad daylight, while 37 people watched from storefronts and porches and wagon seats. Not a single soul moved. She had stopped screaming for help 2 years ago. She had stopped praying 6 months ago. She had stopped believing this God-forsaken town would ever see her as anything more than Nathaniel Ashford's property. But today, a stranger rode into Copper Bend, Montana, and he was about to do what no one else would. The morning had started the way every morning started in the Bennett household, which hadn't been called the Bennett household in 8 years, not since Sarah's mother arranged the marriage that was supposed to save her orphaned daughter from spinsterhood and poverty. Now it was the Ashford house painted white with green shutters, the nicest residence in Copper Bend, and it was a cage. Sarah had woken at 5, careful not to disturb Nathaniel, though he slept like the dead when he'd been drinking, and he'd been drinking every night for months. The mine wasn't producing like it used to. His father, old Henry Ashford, was bedridden with consumption, and asking questions Nathaniel couldn't answer. The pressure was building inside him like steam in a sealed kettle. And when the pressure got too high, Nathaniel opened the valve the only way he knew how. He hit his wife. She'd made breakfast. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with the last of the honey. She'd set the table exactly the way he liked it, fork on the left knife and spoon on the right coffee cup at 2 o'clock to the plate. These details mattered. She'd learned that the hard way over 8 years of marriage that felt more like 80. Nathaniel had come down the stairs already in a foul mood. She could tell by the way his boots hit each step. Heavy, deliberate, angry. The mine foreman had quit the week before, and Nathaniel was doing the man's job himself, which meant rising before dawn and coming home after dark, and he hated every minute of it. "Coffee's cold," he'd said, though it wasn't. "I'll heat it," Sarah had replied, keeping her voice level neutral, the way she'd trained herself to speak. No emotion meant nothing to grab onto, nothing to twist into an excuse, but he'd already decided. She could see it in his eyes. This morning he needed to hurt someone, and she was the only person in his world he was allowed to hurt. The backhand had come fast, catching her across the left cheekbone. Her head snapped to the side, and she'd grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. The eggs she'd just plated scattered across the floor. "Now look what you've done," Nathaniel had said, as though she'd knocked them off the table herself. "Clean it up." She'd cleaned it up. She always cleaned it up. By 10 o'clock, the bruise on her face had darkened to purple. By the time Nathaniel loaded her into the wagon to go into town for supplies, the swelling had closed her left eye halfway. She'd tied her bonnet tight and kept her head down, but it didn't matter. Everyone in Copper Bend had seen Sarah Bennett's bruises before. They just pretended they hadn't. The general store was crowded. Saturday was market day, and the miners came down from the camps with their week's pay buying tobacco and coffee and whatever small luxuries they could afford. Sarah had moved through the aisles with her basket selecting flour, sugar, salt, the staples that kept a household running. The clerk, an old man named Walter with kind eyes and trembling hands, had smiled at her. That was the smile that did it. Nathaniel had been watching from across the store. Nathaniel was always watching. When they'd stepped outside onto Main Street, packages in her arms, he'd grabbed her elbow so hard she'd gasped. "You smiled at him," Nathaniel had said, his voice low and dangerous. "Mr. Walter is 70 years old." Sarah had begun, but that was as far as she got. The flat of Nathaniel's hand connected with her face before she even saw it coming. 1 second she was walking beside him, her eyes fixed on the ground the way he liked. The next second the sky spun. Her cheekbone exploded with white heat, and she was stumbling sideways into the horse tied outside the saloon. The brown paper packages scattered in the dust. "I told you," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying down the length of Main Street with the casual authority of a man who had never once been contradicted. "To keep your eyes off other men." Sarah pressed her hand against the horse to keep from falling. Her vision swam. She could taste copper in her mouth where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. "I wasn't looking at anyone, Nathaniel," she managed. "Don't lie to me." He grabbed the front of her dress and yanked her upright. His face was close to hers now. He smelled like tobacco and bay rum and something sour underneath something that only she knew about. The smell he carried when the anger was just getting started. "You smiled at the clerk," he said. "I was being polite." "You were being a whore." He shoved her backward. She hit the dirt landing hard on her hip. Pain shot up her spine like lightning. Sarah didn't cry out. She had learned a long time ago that crying out made it worse. Crying out was asking for attention, and asking for attention was vanity, and vanity was a sin, and Nathaniel Ashford punished sin. She lay in the dust of Copper Bend's Main Street, and the town did what it always did. Nothing. Old Walt Gentry, who ran the feed store, turned his back and walked inside. Mrs. Patterson pulled her 2 children close and crossed to the other side of the street as though abuse were a disease you could catch by proximity. 2 miners sitting on the saloon porch looked down into their whiskey glasses like the amber liquid had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in the Montana Territory. And Sheriff Henry Cole stood on the jailhouse porch not 40 feet away, arms crossed over his chest, watching the whole thing with the blank expression of a man who had made his peace with cowardice a long time ago. "Get up," Nathaniel said. Sarah got up. She always got up. She gathered the fallen packages, her hands shaking, and tucked them back into her arms. Blood from her split lip dripped onto the brown paper wrapping the flower. "You're bleeding on my flower," Nathaniel observed. "I'm sorry." "You should be." He turned and walked toward the wagon, expecting her to follow. She followed. She always followed. 8 years of marriage had taught her the choreography of submission with the precision of a military drill. Walk 2 steps behind. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look at other men. Don't look at other women. Don't look at anything except the ground and the walls of the house that had become her prison. Sarah loaded the parcels into the wagon bed, moving stiffly. Her hip throbbed where she had landed on it. There would be a bruise the size of a dinner plate by morning. Another purple map of pain on a body already covered in them. "Hurry up," Nathaniel snapped. "I'm going as fast as I can." He grabbed her arm, squeezing the muscle above her elbow until she gasped. The packages fell again. "Don't talk back." "I wasn't." "Every word out of your mouth is a talk back, Sarah. Every single one. You don't know when to shut that mouth of yours. Your father filled your head with books and nonsense, and you think that makes you clever." He squeezed harder. She could feel the individual impressions of his fingers grinding against the bone. "You're not clever," he said. "You're not special. You're a wife. Act like one." He released her arm and climbed into the wagon. Sarah stood there for a moment, her arm throbbing, her face stinging her dignity, somewhere in the dust between the general store and the saloon. Then she heard it, the slow, steady clop of a horse coming up the street. She didn't look up. She had trained herself not to look up. But something about the sound made her pause. It was unhurried, deliberate, the rhythm of a man who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. The horse stopped. "Ma'am?" The voice was low, not loud, not aggressive, just clear. The way a church bell is clear, cutting through noise without trying. Sarah kept her eyes down. "Please don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're thinking about doing, please don't. You'll make it worse." A pause. The creak of saddle leather. "Worse than what I just watched?" Sarah finally looked up. He was still mounted. A lean man on a dusty buckskin horse. He wore a sweat-stained hat pulled low and a work shirt that had been washed so many times the blue had faded to gray. There was a scar running from his left temple down to his jaw, a pale line against sun-darkened skin. His eyes were brown, the color of creek water in autumn, and they were looking at the handprint swelling red on her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't pity. She knew pity. The whole town gave her pity. Those quick, embarrassed glances before they looked away. This was something else. This was anger held on a very tight leash. "Get away from my wife." Nathaniel had turned around on the wagon seat. His voice had changed. It was harder now, the voice he used for men who challenged him, which happened almost never because everyone in Copperbend knew the Ashford name and what it meant. "I said get away from her," Nathaniel repeated. The stranger looked at Nathaniel. He didn't move. He didn't tip his hat. He just looked at him with those quiet brown eyes, and something in the air between the two men changed. "I heard you," the stranger said. "Then move on." "I will, as soon as I know this lady is all right." "She's fine. I wasn't asking you." The stranger looked back down at Sarah. "Ma'am," he said, "are you all right?" Sarah felt her throat close. Nobody asked her that. Nobody had asked her that in 8 years. The question itself was so foreign that for a moment she didn't know how to answer it. "She's fine," Nathaniel shouted again. He jumped down from the wagon, his boots hitting the dirt hard. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders. He walked toward the stranger's horse with his fists already forming. "Now I told you to move along. This is a private matter between a man and his wife." "There ain't nothing private about what I just saw," the stranger said. "You hit this woman in the middle of Main Street. I reckon every soul in town saw it, and not one of them said a goddamn word, did they?" Nathaniel grinned. It was the grin of a man who had bought silence so many times he confused it with approval. "That ought to tell you something," he said. "It tells me plenty." The stranger swung down from his horse. He moved like a man who'd spent his life on the back of animals, fluid and balanced landing light on his feet despite his height. He wasn't as broad as Nathaniel, but there was a sinewy hardness to him, the kind of strength that came from work, not from inheritance. He stood between Sarah and Nathaniel. Just stood there. It was such a simple act. Just a man placing his body between a woman and the man hurting her. But in Copperbend, Montana, in the summer of 1878, it was the most radical thing anyone had done in years. "What's your name, stranger?" Nathaniel asked, his voice dropping to the dangerous register Sarah knew too well. "Jack Rivers." "Well, Mr. Rivers, I own the copper mine that keeps this town alive. I own the land the saloon sits on. I own the land the general store sits on. My father built this town. You understand what I'm telling you. I understand you think owning things makes you important." Nathaniel's face darkened. "Henry," he called over his shoulder. "Henry, get over here." Sheriff Cole walked over slowly, his star catching the afternoon light. He looked uncomfortable the way a dog looks when it's being called to do something it doesn't want to do but will do anyway because it knows where its food comes from. "What's the trouble, Nathaniel?" Cole asked. "This stranger is interfering with my household. I want him gone." Cole looked at Jack. "Mister, I'm going to have to ask you to move along." "On what grounds?" Jack asked. "On the grounds that I'm the law in this town and I'm asking nicely." "The law," Jack repeated. He looked at Cole, then at Sarah, then back at Cole. "Were you the law 10 minutes ago when this man knocked his wife into the dirt? Were you the law then?" Cole's jaw tightened. "What happens between a man and his wife is family business." "It's everybody's business when it happens on a public street," Jack finished. "I've rode through 3 territories, Sheriff. I've seen men hanged for stealing horses. Seems strange to me that you can beat a woman bloody in broad daylight and the law just watches." "You don't know what you're talking about," Nathaniel snarled. "Sarah is my wife. I have the legal right to discipline her as I see fit." "To what?" Jack turned to face him fully. His voice dropped. It got quieter, not louder, and somehow that made it more dangerous. "To what exactly? To hit a woman half your size in the face. To drag her through the dirt. That what your daddy taught you when he built this town." Nathaniel swung. It was a wide telegraphed haymaker, the punch of a man who'd never had to fight anyone who could fight back. Jack sidestepped it easily. He didn't swing back. He just moved, letting Nathaniel's fist cut through empty air, letting the momentum carry the bigger man stumbling forward. Nathaniel spun around, furious. "You're dead, you son of a bitch." "I ain't going to fight you," Jack said. His hands were at his sides open. "Not in front of her, not in front of this town. I came here for supplies, not trouble." "Then get your supplies and get out." "I intend to." Jack looked at Sarah one more time. His eyes held hers for just a second. And in that second Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. Not break. Crack. The way ice cracks in spring. The first hairline fracture before the whole river opens up. He tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am." Then he untied his horse and walked it down the street toward the livery stable, leading the animal by the reins, his back straight, his pace unhurried. Every person on Main Street watched him go, and every person on Main Street understood that something had just happened that had never happened before. A man had stood up to Nathaniel Ashford. Sarah stood motionless, watching until the stranger disappeared around the corner. She could feel Nathaniel's rage radiating off him like heat from a stove. "Get in the wagon," he ordered. "Now!" She climbed in. The ride home was silent, the kind of silence that pressed down like a physical weight, the kind of silence that meant the real punishment was coming. Sarah sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the backs of the horses, calculating. She was always calculating. How angry was he? How much whiskey would he drink before supper? Would it be the belt or the open hand? Would she be able to walk tomorrow? This was her mathematics. Not the sums her father had taught her from his school books, but the grim arithmetic of survival. Pain divided by time. Fear multiplied by proximity. Hope subtracted until the answer was always 0. They reached the house at the edge of town. It was a large house, the nicest in Copper Bend, because Nathaniel Ashford would accept nothing less than the nicest. White paint green shutters, a porch with a swing. It looked like a home. It was a cage. "Inside," Nathaniel said. Sarah went inside. She set the parcels on the kitchen table and began putting things away. Her hands moved automatically, sorting flour, coffee, sugar, salt into their respective places. Her body knew the routine even when her mind was somewhere else. Her mind was on brown eyes and a quiet voice. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "Who was he?" Sarah flinched. Nathaniel was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed. "I don't know," she said. "I never saw him before." "You looked at him." "He spoke to me. It would have been rude to ignore him." The backhand caught her across the left ear. The room tilted. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep from going down. "You looked at him like you knew him," Nathaniel said. "You looked at him like he was something." "I didn't, Nathaniel. I swear. If I find out you've been meeting men behind my back, if I find out you've been spreading your legs for every drifter who rides through this town, I will kill you. Do you understand me? I will put you in the ground." "I haven't been anywhere," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "You know I haven't been anywhere. I go to the store. I go to church. I come home. That's all I do. That's all I've ever done." It was true. Nathaniel had cut her off from the world with the surgical precision of a man who understood that isolation was the most effective form of control. She didn't speak to men alone. She didn't speak to women alone. She had no friends, no confidants, no one to turn to when the bruises got so bad she couldn't hide them under long sleeves and high collars. He stared at her, searching for the lie. There was no lie. "Make dinner," he said finally. "And if that drifter is still in town tomorrow, you stay inside. You don't go near the store. You don't go near the street. Do you understand?" "Yes, Nathaniel." He left the kitchen. She heard him pull a bottle from the cabinet in the parlor, the familiar glug of whiskey into a glass. Sarah stood at the stove, her ear ringing, her hands shaking so badly she could barely strike the match to light the burner. "Are you all right?" 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words from a stranger, and she felt the first crack in the ice. She pressed her hand against her swollen cheek and closed her eyes. She wasn't all right. She hadn't been all right in 8 years. She had married Nathaniel Ashford at 24 because her mother had told her it was a good match, because the Ashfords had money and she was an orphaned schoolteacher's daughter with nothing but a head full of books. Because in 1870 a woman alone was a woman in danger and marriage was supposed to be the shelter. Nobody told her the shelter could be worse than the storm. The first year he only yelled. The second year he pushed her. By the third year he was using his fists. And by now, year 8, Sarah had stopped counting the bruises. She had stopped looking in the mirror because the woman staring back was a stranger, a ghost with hollow eyes and a split lip who had forgotten what her own smile looked like. She cooked dinner, beef and beans and cornbread. She set the table. She poured his whiskey. She sat across from him and ate in silence small bites because eating too much or too little were both punishable offenses. After dinner, Nathaniel drank. He sat in his chair and he drank, and Sarah washed the dishes and the clock on the mantel ticked, and the house was so quiet she could hear the moths hitting the glass of the kerosene lamp. "Come here," Nathaniel said. Sarah dried her hands. She walked to his chair. "Kneel down." She knelt. He took her chin in his hand and tilted her face up. He examined the bruise on her cheek, the swelling on her ear. He touched them, not gently pressing until she winced. "This is your fault," he said. "You know that, right? Everything I do is because you make me. If you would just behave, if you would just be a proper wife, I wouldn't have to correct you. Do you understand?" "I know," Sarah whispered. "Say it." "It's my fault." "Say it again." "It's my fault." He released her chin. "Go to bed." She went upstairs. She closed the bedroom door. There was no lock. There had never been a lock. She undressed in the dark, pulled on her nightgown, and lay down on the edge of the bed as far from his side as possible. She lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Nathaniel drinking below. She thought about her father, James Bennett, the schoolteacher from Vermont, who had taught her to read before she could walk, who had told her that a woman's mind was her greatest weapon, who had died when she was 18, leaving her alone in a world that didn't value women with minds. She thought about the stranger. She thought about the way he had simply stepped down from his horse and stood between her and Nathaniel. No speech, no heroics. Just a body in the gap. A wall between her and the fist. Nobody had ever done that for her. Not her mother, who had arranged the marriage and then died 3 years later with a clear conscience. Not the women at church who clucked their tongues and said they'd pray for her. Not Sheriff Cole, who walked past the bruises the way people walk past cracks in the sidewalk. Just a stranger with brown eyes and a scar down his face and 3 quiet words. "Are you all right?" Sarah turned her face into the pillow. "No," she thought. "No, I am not all right. I am dying in this house. I am dying one bruise at a time, one slap at a time, one it's your fault at a time. And nobody sees it. Nobody cares. But tonight, someone saw. And that terrified her more than anything Nathaniel could do. Because hope was the most dangerous thing a beaten woman could feel. Hope meant believing things could change. And believing things could change meant the next time they didn't change would hurt twice as much. Sarah pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat. Still alive, still here, still breathing. She didn't know that 3 blocks away in the loft above Cooper's livery stable, Jack Rivers was lying awake too. She didn't know that he was staring at the rafters, seeing not the weathered wood, but the face of a woman kneeling in the dust with blood on her lip and something in her eyes that he recognized. He had seen it once before in a mirror the night he came home from the war and found 2 graves instead of a family. She didn't know that he had already decided he was not leaving Copper Bend tomorrow. She didn't know any of that. All Sarah Bennett knew, as the summer heat pressed down on the house like a hand pressing down on a coffin lid, was that for the first time in 8 years she had heard someone say her pain out loud, and she could not unhear it. Jack Rivers didn't sleep that night. He lay in the loft of Cooper's livery stable hay, scratching his neck, heat pressing down through the roof even after midnight. And every time he closed his eyes he saw the same thing. A woman on her knees in the dirt, blood on her lip, and a whole town looking the other way. He'd seen worse in the war. He'd seen men torn apart by canister shot at Shiloh. He'd carried boys half his age with their legs blown off screaming for their mothers. But there was something about the silence of that street that got under his skin in a way the battlefield never had. On the battlefield, at least, the enemy wore a uniform. In Copper Bend, the enemy wore a wedding ring, and the whole damn town called it love. By sunrise, Jack was in the livery yard saddling his horse. Elias Washington was already up mending a harness in the early light. Elias had ridden with Jack for 3 years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. He was the steadiest man Jack had ever known and the most honest, which was why Jack trusted him with things he wouldn't trust a preacher. "You got that look," Elias said without glancing up. "What look?" "The look you get right before you do something stupid." Jack tightened the cinch strap. "I need to stay in town a few days." Elias set the harness down. "We're due back at Morrison's by Thursday. The man don't pay us to sit around." "I know. This about that woman yesterday?" Jack didn't answer. Elias stood up. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with hands that could gentle a wild horse or break a jaw with equal ease. He'd been born into slavery in Georgia, freed himself by walking north in the middle of the night at 15, and fought for the Union at 16. He didn't waste words, and he didn't tolerate foolishness. "Jack, look at me." Jack looked. "That woman has a husband," Elias said. "A rich husband. A husband who owns this town and the sheriff in it. You ride into that and you're riding into a box canyon with no way out." "I know that." "Then what are you planning to do?" "I don't know yet." Elias stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Margaret." The name hit Jack like a slap. "Don't," he said. "You see her in every woman who's hurting Jack. You've been doing it since the war. That widow in Abilene, that girl in Cheyenne. You can't save them all just because you couldn't save her." Jack's hand stilled on the saddle. Margaret. Margaret, with her red hair and her loud laugh and her absolute conviction that the world owed her a good time, and by God, she was going to collect. Margaret, who'd thrown a cast-iron skillet at his head when he forgot to bring home flour, hitting him square between the shoulder blades while she nursed their son Thomas with her other arm. Margaret, who'd died of fever while he was fighting in Tennessee, leaving Thomas in the care of neighbors who did their best but couldn't save a 3-year-old boy from the winter cold. He'd come home to 2 graves and an empty house, and the knowledge that he'd been defending the Union while his family died without him. "This ain't about Margaret," Jack said finally. His voice was rough. "Then what's it about?" "It's about the fact that a man beat a woman bloody in the middle of the street and the sheriff watched. That's what it's about. If that don't bother you, Elias, I don't know what will." Elias was quiet for a beat. "It bothers me plenty," he said. "But I've been a black man in America for 45 years. I've watched people get beaten and worse, and nobody lifted a finger. You think this is new to me? You think I don't know what it looks like when the law protects the wrong people? Then help me. Help you do what? Get killed. Help me figure out how to get her away from him." Elias picked up the harness again. He worked the leather through his fingers, thinking. "You don't even know this woman," he said. "I know enough. You know she's got a bruise on her face. That ain't the same as knowing her." "It's enough to start." Elias sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had argued with Jack Rivers before and lost every time. Not because Jack was smarter, but because Jack was more stubborn than a fence post in frozen ground. "You're going to get us both killed," Elias said. "Probably." "All right then, but we do this smart, not loud." Jack almost smiled. Almost. He rode into town at mid-morning. The heat was already brutal, shimmering off the dirt street in waves. He tied his horse outside the general store and went in buying things he didn't need. A pound of coffee, a box of cartridges. He took his time watching the street through the window. He didn't see her. He paid for his goods and walked outside. An old woman was sweeping the porch of a boarding house across the street. She was small, white-haired, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old saddle leather. She watched him with sharp blue eyes. "You're the one from yesterday," she said. Jack touched his hat. "Ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. I'm too old for courtesy." She stopped sweeping. "You're the fool who stepped between Nathaniel Ashford and his wife." "I've been called worse." "I'm sure you have." She leaned on the broom. "You planning to stick around town for a bit?" "Maybe." "Then you better come inside and have coffee, because if you stand out on this street staring at the Ashford house, you'll be dead by sundown." Jack looked at her. "Who are you?" Pearl Harris. I own this boarding house and I'm the only person in this town who isn't scared of that family. She turned and walked inside, leaving the door open behind her. Jack followed. The boarding house was clean and simple. Pearl poured 2 cups of coffee at a table near the back and sat down like she'd been waiting for this conversation for years. "How bad is it?" Jack asked. "How bad do you think you saw her face? I mean, how long has it been going on?" "Since the wedding night, near as I can tell. 8 years. She came to this town with light in her eyes. Smart girl. Read books. Smiled at people." Pearl's jaw tightened. He beat it out of her, year by year, bruise by bruise. Now she walks around like a ghost and nobody does anything. "What are they going to do?" Jack asked. "His father built the mine. The mine keeps this town alive. Sheriff Cole is on the Ashford payroll. The judge rides circuit and comes through twice a year. By the time he gets here, the bruises have faded and Nathaniel's wearing his Sunday smile." Pearl took a sip of coffee. "Besides," she said, "the law says a man can discipline his wife. You know that as well as I do." Jack gripped his cup. "Discipline. That's what they're calling it. That's what they've always called it. You're not from around here, Mr. Rivers. You don't know how things work." "I know how things should work." Pearl studied him. "My husband hit me for 22 years, she said. "He died in 71. Fell off his horse drunk and broke his neck. That was the best day of my life." She said it flat without shame. "You know what I learned in 22 years?" she continued. "Nobody saves you. You save yourself or you die waiting." "Then why are you talking to me?" "Because Sarah can't save herself. Not yet. She doesn't know she's allowed to." That sentence settled in Jack's chest like a stone. "She comes here sometimes," Pearl continued, "when Nathaniel is at the mine. She helps me with the linens. It's the only time she talks, the only time she breathes." "Does he know?" "He knows she does washing for me. He allows it because I pay her and the money goes to him." Pearl's lip curled. "Everything goes to him." "When does she come?" "Tuesdays and Thursdays." Jack set down his cup. "I'll be here." Pearl grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You listen to me," she said. "If you do this, if you talk to that girl, you do it careful. She's like a wild animal that's been kicked too many times. You come at her too fast and she'll bolt, not away from you, back to him, because that's the only cage she knows." "I understand." "No, you don't. But you will. If only Sarah had known what standing in that street would cost her. If only she had known it would cost them all." Sarah came on Tuesday. She came through the back door of the boarding house at 10 o'clock in the morning, moving quickly, her head covered with a bonnet even in the heat. She carried a basket of dirty linens, and she didn't look up until she was inside. "Morning, Pearl," she said. "Morning, honey. I've got coffee on." Sarah set the basket down and reached for the washboard. Then she stopped. Jack was sitting at the kitchen table. Every muscle in her body went rigid. He could see it happen, the way her shoulders pulled up toward her ears, the way her hands curled into fists, the way her eyes darted to the door like a trapped animal calculating the distance to escape. "Easy," Pearl said. "He's a friend." "I can't be here," Sarah said. She was already picking up the basket. "If Nathaniel finds out—" "Nathaniel is at the mine," Pearl said firmly. "He won't be back until 5. Sit down." "I can't, Pearl." Pearl's voice softened. "Sit down, please." Sarah stood there clutching the basket like a shield. She looked at Jack. The bruise on her cheek had deepened to a dark purple, the center almost black. There was a new mark on her neck just above the collar of her dress, finger-shaped. "I'm sorry about yesterday," Jack said. "I didn't mean to cause you trouble." Sarah let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Almost." "Trouble," she said. "You think yesterday was trouble? Yesterday was a Tuesday. Yesterday was ordinary." The words hit the room like a gunshot. Jack felt his jaw tighten. Sarah set the basket down. She didn't sit. She stood by the wall, arms crossed, as far from him as the room allowed. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "You should have left yesterday." I know. Then why didn't you? Jack looked at his hands. They were rough-scarred, a working man's hands. Because I've been where you are, he said. Sarah frowned. You've been beaten by a husband. I've been in a place where I thought dying was easier than living. He said it plainly, without drama. After the war, he continued, after I lost my wife and my son, Margaret died of fever while I was fighting in Tennessee. My boy Thomas was 3. Neighbors took him in. He died that winter. I came home to 2 graves and an empty house. The room was silent. I spent 2 years trying to drink myself into a 3rd grave, Jack continued. It was Elias who pulled me out. He said something I'll never forget. He said, you ain't honoring them by dying. You're just making 3 graves instead of 2. Sarah's arms slowly uncrossed. I'm sorry, she said, about your wife and your boy. It was a long time ago. Does it stop hurting? No, but you learn to carry it different. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Not a glance, not the quick, frightened assessment of a woman checking to see if a man was about to hit her. A real look, the kind that goes past the face and the scar and the dust and finds the person underneath. He'll kill me one day, Sarah said quietly. I know that. I've known it for a while. One day he'll go too far and it'll be over, and the town will put flowers on my grave and say what a shame it was and how they wish they'd known. Sarah, they know. They just don't care enough to do anything about it. I care. You don't even know me. I know you're standing in a kitchen telling a stranger you're going to die, Jack said, and your voice isn't even shaking. That tells me everything I need to know about you. Sarah's composure cracked just a fraction. Her chin trembled, and she pressed her lips together to stop it. She turned away from him, facing the wall. You should go, Mr. Rivers, she said. I mean it. Nathaniel has friends, rough men. If he finds out you're talking to me, he won't come himself. He'll send them, and they won't just beat you. They'll kill you and dump your body in a mine shaft, and nobody will ever ask a single question. Let me worry about that. Don't you understand? She spun around, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. I'm not worth it. I'm not worth dying for. I'm not worth anything. I'm a woman who can't even keep her husband from hitting her. I'm a woman who flinches when someone raises their hand to wave hello. I'm broken, Mr. Rivers. I've been broken for so long I don't even remember what whole felt like. Jack stood up. He didn't walk toward her. He just stood the way he'd stood in the street, putting himself in the space without crowding it. My wife Margaret used to say something, he said. She'd say a cracked pot still holds water. It just needs someone to stop kicking it. He paused. You're not broken, Sarah. You're cracked. There's a difference. Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth. A sound came out of her. Not a sob. Something deeper. Something that had been locked in her chest for 8 years and was fighting its way out like a fist through a wall. Pearl appeared in the doorway. She looked at Sarah. She looked at Jack. She didn't say a word. She just set a handkerchief on the table and went back to the front room. Sarah picked up the handkerchief and pressed it against her eyes. When she lowered it, her face was wet, but her voice was steady. Tuesdays and Thursdays, she said. I'm here from 10 to 2. That's all I have. Then I'll be here, Tuesdays and Thursdays. As what, my friend? If you'll let me. Sarah almost smiled. It was the ghost of a smile, barely a movement. But Jack saw it, and it hit him harder than any bullet he'd ever taken. Don't be late, she said. He wasn't late, not once. Over the next 3 weeks, Jack Rivers showed up at Pearl's boarding house every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 sharp. He brought things, small things, a book of poems he'd found at the general store, a tin of the good tea, not the cheap dust they sold at the saloon, a comb made of real bone because Sarah had mentioned once that the teeth had broken off her old one. He never tried to touch her. He never moved too quickly. He sat at the kitchen table and he talked to her while she worked. And slowly, the way spring thaws a frozen river, Sarah began to talk back. She told him about her father, the school teacher from Vermont who had believed that girls deserved education as much as boys, who had taught her Latin and mathematics, and Shakespeare, who had died of pneumonia when she was 18, leaving her with nothing but a head full of knowledge and a world that didn't value it. She told him about her mother, who had married a shopkeeper in Ohio 3 months after her father's death and arranged Sarah's marriage to Nathaniel like a business transaction. She said I was lucky, Sarah told him, her voice flat. She said Nathaniel was a good match. I was 24 and I'd never been kissed. And she said any man willing to take a plain girl with no dowry was a gift from God. You ain't plain, Jack said. Sarah looked at him sharply, waiting for the joke to catch the cruelty hidden inside the compliment. There was none. She changed the subject. She told him how the first beating happened, their wedding night. She had asked Nathaniel to be gentle, and he had taken it as an insult. She told him how she'd woken up the next morning with a black eye, and Nathaniel had brought her flowers and said it would never happen again. She told him how she'd believed him the second time and the third and the 10th, and how somewhere around the 50th time she stopped believing but also stopped caring. That's the worst part, Sarah said. Not the hitting, the giving up. When you stop fighting something inside you goes quiet, and once it goes quiet it's very hard to make it loud again. It's getting loud now, Jack said. Sarah looked at him. How do you know? Because you're sitting here talking to me instead of going home. By the second week their conversations had grown deeper. Sarah asked about Margaret, and Jack found himself telling stories he hadn't told anyone, not even Elias. He told her about Margaret's laugh, how it could fill a room. He told her about the skillet incident, and Sarah had actually laughed a real laugh that made Pearl poke her head in from the other room just to hear it. She sounds wonderful, Sarah had said. She was. She was also stubborn as a mule and twice as loud when she was angry. But she was mine and I was hers, and we were building something, a life, a family. And then the war came and took it all away. Do you still love her? I'll always love her. She's part of me. But she's gone, Sarah. She's been gone a long time. And is that why you're here? Because I remind you of her? Jack shook his head. You don't remind me of her. Not one bit. Margaret was loud and wild and couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. You're quiet and careful, and you think about every word before you say it. You're nothing like her. Then why? Because you're you, and that's enough. Sarah had looked down at her hands, and Jack had seen the slightest tremor in her fingers. By the 3rd week, Jack noticed the changes in Sarah. Small things. She was starting to hold her head up when she spoke. There was a hint of color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. She smiled more easily, though the smiles were still tentative, like she was testing whether the world would punish her for showing happiness. But Nathaniel noticed too. Thursday of the 3rd week, Sarah came to Pearl's house moving differently, slower, more carefully. She set the basket down, and when she turned, Jack saw that her left wrist was wrapped in a bandage. What happened? He asked, though he already knew. I was clumsy, Sarah said. It was the automatic response, the lie she'd told so many times it came out without thought. Then she stopped herself. She looked at Jack. He twisted it. Sunday night. I said something he didn't like, and he grabbed my wrist and twisted until I heard it crack. Pearl came in from the front room. Let me see, she said. Sarah unwrapped the bandage. The wrist was swollen purple and green. Pearl examined it with gentle hands. It's not broken, she said, but it's badly sprained. You need to keep it wrapped and elevated. No washing for you this week. I have to work, Sarah said. If I don't bring money home, he'll want to know why. I'll give you the money anyway, Pearl said. You sit here and rest that wrist and talk to Jack. That's work enough. Sarah sat. She looked exhausted, not just physically, but in her soul. He knows something's different, she said quietly. He can tell. He keeps asking me why I seem happy lately. And I keep telling him I'm not happy, but he doesn't believe me. He's watching me all the time now, questioning everything. Where I've been, who I've talked to, why I took an extra 10 minutes at the store. She looked at Jack. "He's going to find out about you," she said. "And when he does, he'll hurt you, or worse." "Let him try. You don't understand. Nathaniel doesn't fight fair. He'll send men, or he'll wait until you're alone and shoot you in the back, or he'll have the sheriff arrest you on some made-up charge and you'll rot in that jail until he decides what to do with you." Jack reached across the table and laid his hand palm up on the wooden surface, an invitation, not a demand. Sarah looked at his hand for a long moment. Then slowly she placed her good hand in his. His fingers closed around hers gently. "I've been in wars," Jack said. "I've been shot at and stabbed and beaten half to death more times than I can count. I'm still here, and I'm not leaving, not until I know you're safe. I'll never be safe as long as I'm his wife. Then we'll figure out how to change that." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You can't just divorce a man in Montana Territory. The law doesn't work that way. I'm his property. I'm his until he decides he's done with me, or until one of us dies." "There are other laws," Jack said. "Laws against assault, against attempted murder. If we can prove what he's done to you, really prove it, we can get you out." "How?" "Who's going to believe me? The sheriff is Nathaniel's friend. The judge comes twice a year, and he's known the Ashford family his whole life. And even if they did believe me, the law says a man has the right to discipline his wife. You said it yourself." Pearl had been listening from the doorway. "There's a circuit judge," she said. "Judge William Hartford. He's not from around here. He rides the Northern Circuit, and he's got a reputation for being fair, more than fair. He's known for going after powerful men who think they're above the law." "When does he come through?" Jack asked. "Not for 6 weeks. He was here in March. He won't be back until September." 6 weeks, Jack said. "Can you make it 6 weeks?" Sarah looked at her bandaged wrist. "I don't know," she said honestly. "He's getting worse. The mine is losing money. His father is dying. Nathaniel is under more pressure than he's ever been, and when he's under pressure he needs someone to hurt. That someone is always me." "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance," Jack said. "Starting now, you don't go anywhere alone. When you come here, Elias or I will be watching the street. If Nathaniel shows up early, we'll see him coming, and you can leave out the back. At home, you keep your head down, and you don't give him any reason to suspect. Can you do that?" "I've been doing that for 8 years. And in 6 weeks, when Judge Hartford comes, we'll have everything ready. Medical records, witness statements, everything we need to prove what he's done to you." "What medical records?" Sarah asked. "Nathaniel would never let me see a real doctor." "What about 2 years ago?" Pearl said. "When your wrist was broken the first time. You saw Dr. Whitfield, remember?" Sarah nodded slowly. "He set the bone and wrapped it, but then Nathaniel found out that Dr. Whitfield had written it up in his records as an assault injury. The next week, someone broke into the doctor's office and burned all his files. Dr. Whitfield left town 2 days later." "Did he keep copies?" Jack asked. "He told me he did," Sarah said. "He said he sent duplicates to a colleague in Helena, Dr. Arthur Fleming. He said it was insurance in case Nathaniel ever tried to destroy the evidence." Jack looked at Elias, who had come in during the conversation. "Helena is 3 days hard riding," Elias said. 4 if you take it easy on the horse." "Then I'll go," Jack said. "You can't," Sarah said quickly. "Nathaniel is already suspicious. If you disappear for a week, he'll know something is happening. He might come after me just to find out what." "Then I'll go," Elias said. "I'm just another ranch hand looking for work. Nobody pays attention to me. I can be in Helena and back in 6 days, maybe 7. Jack nodded slowly. "If those records exist," he said, "and if Dr. Fleming is willing to testify, we'll have proof, real proof, the kind even a territorial judge can't ignore." "And if the records don't exist?" Sarah asked. "Then we find another way," Jack said. "But we don't give up. You hear me? We don't give up." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, but you're not alone anymore." Thursday of the 4th week, Sarah didn't come. Jack waited until noon, pacing Pearl's kitchen like a caged animal. Pearl stood in the doorway, her face tight with worry. "Something's wrong," Jack said. "Maybe he kept her home." She would have found a way to send word. She always sends word. Maybe she couldn't. Jack grabbed his hat. Pearl stepped in front of him. "Don't you dare walk up to that house," she said. "Not in daylight, not while he's home. Pearl, if he's hurt her. If he's hurt her and you go storming up there, he'll hurt her worse for proving she had someone who cared. You know that. Think with your head, not your gut." Jack stopped. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He forced himself to breathe. He forced himself to sit back down. He waited. At 6 o'clock that evening, Pearl went to the general store. She came back 20 minutes later, her face gray. "Sarah was in the store this afternoon," Pearl said. She sat down heavily. "Mrs. Patterson saw her. Her arm is in a sling." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. "He broke it," Pearl continued. Her voice shook. "Snapped it like a twig because she was 5 minutes late coming home from church on Sunday." Jack stood up so fast the chair hit the wall. "Sit down," Pearl hissed. "I'm done sitting." "And what are you going to do, ride up there and shoot him? Then you hang. And Sarah has nobody." "She has nobody now," Jack said. "She's got a broken arm and a monster for a husband and a town full of cowards." "She has us," Pearl shouted back. Her voice cracked, and for the first time Jack saw tears in the old woman's eyes. "She has us, you fool. And if you get yourself killed, she loses the only people who see her." The words landed. Jack put his hands on the table and leaned forward, his head bowed, breathing hard. "I can't just wait, Pearl." "You have to," she said. "For now, but not forever. I've been thinking. There's a circuit judge who comes through in 6 weeks. Judge Hartford. He's not on the Ashford payroll. If we can get Sarah to testify, if we can show the bruises, get a doctor's word." 6 weeks. Jack's voice was hollow. "She might not have 6 weeks. Then we make sure she does." Elias arrived in town that evening. He'd ridden in from Morrison's ranch sensing trouble the way he always did. Jack told him everything. Elias listened without interrupting. When Jack finished, Elias was quiet for a long time. "You love her," Elias said. "That's not what this is about." "I didn't ask what it's about. I said you love her." Jack didn't deny it. "Then we do this right," Elias said. "Not with guns, not yet. We build a case. We find witnesses. We make sure that when the judge gets here, Nathaniel Ashford has nowhere to hide. And in the meantime, we watch, we wait, and we keep that woman alive." The next Tuesday, Sarah came. She walked into Pearl's kitchen with her left arm bound tight against her body, her face pale, and she sat down at the table and picked up her coffee cup with her right hand as if nothing had happened. Jack sat across from her. He didn't speak. He couldn't. If he opened his mouth, what would come out wouldn't be words. It would be something raw and violent, and it would scare her. "Don't look at me like that," Sarah said. "Like what?" "Like I'm dying." "Are you?" Sarah set the cup down. She looked him dead in the eye. "No," she said. "I'm not dying. I'm waking up." She reached across the table with her good hand and placed it flat on the wood palm, down fingers spread. "Something changed, Jack," she said. "After that first day when you stood in the street, something cracked open inside me and it won't close again. I can't make it close. I don't want to make it close." Jack placed his hand on the table next to hers. "Not touching. Close enough." "What do you want, Sarah?" She took a breath. "I want to stop being afraid in my own home," she said. "I want to walk down the street without flinching. I want to read a book without being told it's a waste of time. I want to feel the sun on my face without calculating how to explain the time I spent outside." Her voice broke. "I want to be a person again." "You are a person. Not in this town, not to anyone here. I'm Nathaniel's wife. That's all I am. That's all I'll ever be." She paused. "Unless something changes." "Something is changing," Jack said. "What? You just said unless. A month ago you said that's all I'll ever be, and you meant it. Now you're saying unless. That's not nothing, Sarah. That's everything." Sarah looked at her hand on the table. She looked at his hand next to it. Slowly, carefully, like a bird landing on a branch it wasn't sure would hold, she moved her fingers until they touched his. The contact was electric. Not romantic, not yet. Something more fundamental than that. It was one human being reaching for another across a distance that fear had made infinite and finding that the distance was only inches after all. "Nathaniel is getting worse," Sarah whispered. "He drinks every night now. He talks about the mine drying up. His father is sick. The money is running out. And when Nathaniel is terrified, he hurts me, because I'm the only thing he can control. He won't control you much longer. You don't know that." Jack took her face in his hands, gently. His thumbs rested on her cheekbones, avoiding the bruise with the careful precision of a man who understood that this woman had been touched with violence so many times that every touch now carried the echo of pain. "I do," he said, "because I know you, Sarah Bennett. I've watched you sit in this kitchen with a broken arm and a body full of bruises and talk about wanting to be free. A woman who can say that out loud isn't a woman who stays down. You just need time." Sarah almost laughed. "Time," she said. "Time is the one thing he might not give me." Jack was about to respond when the back door slammed open. Sarah yanked her hand away from Jack so fast she knocked over her coffee cup. She was on her feet, her face white, her body already folding into the posture of submission. Shoulders hunched, head down, making herself small. But it wasn't Nathaniel. It was Pearl, out of breath, her face twisted with alarm. "He's coming," Pearl gasped. "Nathaniel, he left the mine early. Mrs. Patterson told him she saw Sarah here last Tuesday. He's coming, and he's bringing 2 of his men." Sarah made a sound, a small animal sound of pure terror. Jack was already moving. "How long?" he asked. "Minutes, maybe less." "Sarah, listen to me." Jack took her shoulders. She flinched but didn't pull away. "Go out the back. Go through the alley to the church. Stay there until I come for you." "He'll hurt Pearl," Sarah said. "He'll destroy the boarding house. I'll handle Nathaniel. You can't fight 3 men." "I'm not going to fight anyone." He turned to Pearl. "You still got that guest registry, the one with Nathaniel's father's signature from when he stayed here in '72. Pearl blinked. "What, yes, somewhere." "Get it. And get every piece of paper you have that connects the Ashford name to this building. Receipts, letters, anything." "Why?" "Because a man who destroys a business he's financially connected to isn't disciplining his wife," Jack said. "He's committing fraud, and fraud is something a circuit judge takes very seriously." Pearl stared at him. Then a slow, fierce grin spread across her weathered face. "You sneaky son of a gun," she said. "Go, both of you, now." Sarah grabbed Jack's arm. Her grip was desperate. "Be careful," she said. "I will. Promise me." He looked at her. Bruised face, broken arm eyes burning with a fire he'd watched ignite over 4 weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays. "I promise." Sarah ran. Pearl ran. Jack Rivers stood alone in the kitchen of the boarding house listening to the sound of heavy boots and angry voices coming up the front steps, and he did what he had done in the street that first day. He planted his feet, and he did not move. But what Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't have known as she hurried through the alley toward the church, was that Nathaniel Ashford had not slept in 3 days. He sat at the kitchen table of the house he had built for a wife who no longer lived in it, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and the wreckage of a man who was losing control of everything he had ever controlled. The mine was hemorrhaging money. His father, old Henry Ashford, was bedridden and coughing blood and asking questions Nathaniel couldn't answer. The town was whispering. He could feel the whispers like insects crawling beneath his skin. And Sarah. Sarah had said no. That word circled inside his skull like a vulture. No. She had stood in that dirt yard with her broken arm and her shaking voice, and she had looked him in the eye and said no. In front of men. In front of the sheriff. In front of that drifter who had poisoned her mind. Nathaniel picked up the revolver. He spun the cylinder. Full 6 rounds. He set it back down. He wasn't going to wait for any judge. He wasn't going to wait for medical records or testimony or any of the legal machinery that Sarah and her cowboy thought would save them. Nathaniel Ashford had learned one lesson from his father, and he had learned it well. When a problem gets too big for money to fix, you fix it with finality. He stood up. He put on his coat. He holstered the revolver. Then he walked out into the night. And Sarah Bennett, sleeping fitfully in the church basement under Pearl's watchful eye, had no idea that tomorrow would bring a choice that would define the rest of her life, a choice between vengeance and freedom, between becoming what had hurt her or becoming something new. If only she had known what the next 24 hours would cost her. If only she had known it would cost them all. The dog started barking at Morrison's ranch just after midnight. Jack was on the front porch, rifle across his knees, watching the road. The moon was high, throwing silver light across the flat ground, and every shadow looked like a man on horseback. He'd moved Sarah and Pearl to Jim Morrison's homestead 5 miles east of town that afternoon, after the confrontation at the boarding house had ended, with Nathaniel storming out, his hired men trailing behind him like whipped dogs. Morrison was 70 years old, tough as rawhide, and he hated the Ashford family with the quiet, patient hatred of a man who had been cheated by them for decades. "Put them in the back house," Morrison had told Jack. "I've got 12 hands on this ranch. Every one of them knows how to shoot. Ashford wants to come out here and start trouble. He's welcome to try." Sarah had settled in, though she hated hiding, hated being dependent on the kindness of strangers. But she'd also slept through the night for the first time in years, because there was no lock on the door that she needed and no footsteps coming down the hall that she feared. Now the dog was barking. Then it whimpered. Then it went silent. A dog that stops barking is a dog that's been silenced. "Get inside," Jack said quietly to Sarah, who had come out onto the porch when she heard the commotion. "Wake Morrison. Wake Pearl. Now." Sarah ran. Jack moved off the porch, staying low, circling toward the barn where the dog had been tied. He found the animal lying on its side, alive but dazed. Someone had fed it drugged meat. This wasn't an angry drunk riding up to the ranch in a rage. This was planned. This was calculated. A sound behind him. Boot on gravel. Jack spun. The rifle came up. "Easy, Rivers." The voice came from the darkness behind the barn. It wasn't Nathaniel's voice. It was deeper, rougher, unfamiliar. "Drop the rifle, or the old woman dies." A second figure emerged from the shadows on his left, pulling Pearl by the arm. Pearl's face was white. A pistol was pressed against her ribs. "I said drop it," the voice repeated. Jack lowered the rifle. He set it on the ground. "Kick it away." He kicked it. 2 men stepped into the moonlight. They weren't the miners from before. These were different, harder. The kind of men you found in the dark corners of cattle towns. Men who hired out violence the way other men hired out horses. "Where's Ashford?" Jack asked. "Mr. Ashford sends his regards," the taller man said. "He wants the woman, his wife. You hand her over, nobody gets hurt." "And if I don't?" The shorter man cocked his pistol. "Then we start with the old lady and work our way through the ranch until someone tells us where she is." "She's not here," Jack lied. "Don't waste my time, Rivers. We watched the house. She's inside." Pearl gripped Jack's arm. "Don't give her to them," she hissed. "Don't you dare." "Shut that old woman up," the tall one said. "Let me talk to Ashford," Jack said. "Face to face, man to man. He doesn't need hired guns. He doesn't need to hurt anyone. Let me talk to him." "Mr. Ashford is done talking." The back door of the ranch house opened. Sarah stepped out. "Sarah, no!" Pearl screamed. Sarah walked into the yard. She was calm, terrifyingly calm. The kind of calm that comes when a person has made a decision and the fear has burned away, leaving nothing but resolve. "I'll go with you," Sarah said. "Sarah, don't do this," Jack said. "If I go, you leave these people alone. That's the deal. Me for them." The tall man smiled. "Smart woman." Sarah turned to face Jack. Her eyes were steady. "Listen to me," she said. "I've spent 8 years letting other people get hurt because of me. Pearl's boarding house, Dr. Whitfield, Eli Foster, Clara Doss. Everyone who ever tried to help me got destroyed. I won't let it happen again. Not to Pearl, not to Morrison, not to you." "This isn't sacrifice, Sarah," Jack said. "This is surrender." It's neither. It's a choice. My choice. The first real choice I've made in 8 years. She stepped toward the two men. Take me to my husband. Sarah! Jack lunged forward. The shorter man raised his pistol and fired. The bullet hit the dirt at Jack's feet. He stopped. Next one goes in your chest, cowboy, the man said. Sarah didn't look back. She walked between the two hired men, her back straight, her head up, and they led her toward the horses waiting beyond the barn. Jack stood in the yard, fists clenched, every muscle in his body, screaming to move, to fight, to do something. But the gun was pointed at Pearl, and Sarah was already being lifted onto a horse, and the night was swallowing them all. Pearl grabbed his shirt. Go after her, she said. Go now. They'll kill her if I follow. They'll kill her if you don't. Nathaniel didn't send those men to bring her home, Jack. He sent them to bring her somewhere he can do whatever he wants without witnesses. You know that. Jack knew it. He'd known it from the moment the man said Ashford was done talking. He picked up his rifle. He ran for the barn. Morrison was already there, saddling a horse. The old rancher's face was grim and hard. I heard the shot, Morrison said. I've got 3 hands riding in from the north pasture. They'll be here in 20 minutes. I don't have 20 minutes. Then take the roan. He's the fastest thing on 4 legs I've got. Morrison pressed a second revolver into Jack's hand. Bring that girl back, Rivers. Jack mounted and rode hard into the darkness. He tracked them by moonlight. 2 horses carrying 3 riders left deep prints in the dry summer earth, and Jack had spent enough years on cattle drives to read ground the way other men read newspapers. The tracks led north away from town, not toward the Ashford house, toward the mine. Pearl had been right. Nathaniel wasn't taking Sarah home. He was taking her somewhere no one would hear her scream. Jack pushed the roan harder. The horse responded, stretching out its stride hooves, pounding the packed earth. The wind tore at Jack's hat and his eyes watered, but he didn't slow down. The mine entrance appeared in the moonlight. A dark mouth cut into the hillside, surrounded by rusting equipment and abandoned ore carts. A single lantern burned inside the foreman's shack. Jack dismounted 100 yards out and tied the roan to a scrub pine. He checked the rifle. Full magazine. He checked Morrison's revolver. 6 rounds. He moved forward on foot, staying low, staying quiet. Through the window of the shack he could see them. Sarah was sitting in a chair. Her hands were tied behind her back with rope. Her face was bruised again fresh. A cut above her eyebrow was bleeding into her eye. Nathaniel stood in front of her. His sleeves were rolled up. His knuckles were red. The 2 hired men stood by the door watching. Nathaniel's voice carried through the thin walls. You humiliated me, he was saying, in front of the whole town, in front of my men, in front that cowboy. He leaned down into Sarah's face. You made me look weak. You are weak, Sarah said. Nathaniel hit her. Open hand. The sound was sharp and ugly. Sarah's head snapped to the side. She spat blood onto the floor. Then she looked back up at him. You are weak, she repeated. You've always been weak. That's why you hit me. Because it's the only way you can feel strong. Without your father's money and your father's name, you're nothing. You're an empty suit walking around a dying town pretending to be a man. Shut up. The mine is failing. Your father is dying. The town is turning against you, and instead of facing any of it, you dragged your wife to a mine shaft in the middle of the night because she's the only person left who can't fight back. I said shut up. Except I can fight back now, Nathaniel. I already did. I stood in that yard and I said no, and you heard it, and it terrified you. 110-pound woman with a broken arm said one word, and you fell apart. Nathaniel grabbed the chair and flipped it. Sarah hit the ground hard. Her bound hands couldn't break the fall. She gasped. The wind knocked out of her. Nathaniel stood over her, breathing hard, his face twisted. He pulled the revolver from his holster. I should have done this years ago, he whispered. Should have done it the first time you talked back. Should have done it and told everyone you fell down the stairs. Sarah looked up at the barrel of the gun. She was bleeding. She was tied. She was on the floor of a mine shack in the middle of the night with a revolver pointed at her face. And she was not afraid. She had spent 8 years being afraid. Afraid in the morning and afraid at night and afraid in between. afraid of his hands and his voice and his silence and the sound of his boots on the stairs, afraid of everything. But somewhere between that first day in the street and this moment on this floor, the fear had burned down to nothing. And what was underneath it, what had been underneath it all along, wasn't weakness, it was fury. "Do it," Sarah said. Nathaniel blinked. "Do it, Nathaniel. Pull the trigger, because if you don't, if I walk out of here alive, I will destroy you. I will stand in front of that judge, and I will tell him everything. Every bruise, every broken bone, every threat. Eli Foster, Clara Doss, all of it. And when I'm done, you won't just lose your wife. You'll lose your mind, your money, your name, and your freedom. So if you're going to shoot me, you better do it now, because tomorrow you won't get the chance." Nathaniel's hand was shaking. The revolver trembled in his grip. He was a man who had spent his entire life controlling everything around him, and now everything was spinning out of reach. "Boss," the tall hired man said from the doorway. "We should go. Someone might have followed." "Shut up," Nathaniel screamed without turning around. "Shut up. I'm handling this." "You're not handling anything," Sarah said from the floor. "You're falling apart. Look at your hands shaking. You can't even hold a gun straight. What are you going to tell the judge, Nathaniel? What are you going to tell your father, that you shot your wife in a mine shack, that you paid men to kidnap her? How does that story end for you?" Nathaniel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "It ends with you dead and buried in Shaft 4, right next to Eli Foster." The room went silent. Even the hired men stopped moving. The tall one looked at the short one. Something passed between them. The sudden cold realization that they had signed on for an intimidation job and were now standing in the middle of a murder confession. "I didn't sign up for this," the short one said. "You signed up for what I'm paying you for," Nathaniel snarled. "You're paying us to scare a woman not to stand around while you confess to killing a minor." The short man holstered his pistol. "I'm out. You walk out that door and I'll—" The short man walked out the door. The tall man hesitated. He looked at Nathaniel, at Sarah on the floor, at the gun shaking in Nathaniel's hand. He made his calculation. "This ain't worth $50, the tall man said, and he followed his partner into the night. Now it was just Nathaniel and Sarah. The lantern flickered. The mine creaked and groaned in the darkness behind the shack, the deep subterranean sounds of earth settling. Nathaniel's face crumbled. Without the hired men, without the audience, without the power structure he had built around himself, he was exactly what Sarah had said he was: empty. A man-shaped hole where a person should be. "Why?" Nathaniel whispered. The gun lowered slightly. "Why couldn't you just behave? Why couldn't you just be a good wife? I gave you a house. I gave you clothes. I gave you my name. All you had to do was obey." "You gave me a cage," Sarah said, "and you called it a home. You gave me bruises and called it discipline. You gave me fear and called it love. That's not a marriage, Nathaniel. That's a prison sentence. I didn't know that for a long time, but I know it now. I loved you. You owned me. There's a difference." The back wall of the shack exploded inward. Jack came through the window like a storm. He hit Nathaniel from behind, driving him face first into the floor. The revolver flew from Nathaniel's hand, skittering across the boards. Jack pinned him down with his knee, one hand on the back of Nathaniel's neck, pressing his face into the wood. Nathaniel screamed, writhing, trying to buck Jack off. But Jack had the leverage and the rage and the cold, controlled strength of a man who had waited too long to do this. "Sarah!" Jack set his voice steady, even as Nathaniel thrashed beneath him. "Are you hurt?" "I'm tied." "Cut yourself loose." Jack pulled his knife with one hand, keeping Nathaniel pinned with the other. He tossed the knife. It landed next to Sarah. She rolled, grabbed it with her bound hands, and began sawing at the rope. "I'll kill you!" Nathaniel screamed into the floorboards. "I'll kill you both. You don't know who I am." "I know exactly who you are," Jack said. "You're a man who ties up women and points guns at them in the dark. That's who you are." Sarah cut through the rope. Her hands came free. She stood shaking the blood back into her fingers. She picked up Nathaniel's revolver from the floor. "Sarah," Jack said carefully. "Put it down." Sarah didn't put it down. She stood over Nathaniel, the gun in her hand, looking down at the man who had beaten her for 8 years. Her face was bloody, her arm was broken, her whole body ached with fresh pain. It would be so easy. One squeeze, one sound, and it would be over. Every nightmare, every flinch, every time she'd said it's my fault because he told her to say it. One bullet, and all of it would stop. "Sarah," Jack's voice was gentle now, "this isn't who you are." "How do you know who I am?" she asked. "I don't even know who I am. I don't know who I'll be when the bruises heal and the fear fades. What if you don't like her?" "I know you're not him," Jack said. "I know you've spent 8 years having violence done to you, and if you pull that trigger you become the thing you survived. Don't give him that. Don't let him turn you into something you'll have to live with." Sarah's hand trembled. Tears cut through the blood on her face. "He'll come back," she whispered. "No matter what the judge does, no matter what happens, he'll come back. Men like him always come back. Then we'll be ready. Together. Every single time." Sarah looked at the gun. She looked at Nathaniel pinned on the floor dirt on his face, terror in his eyes. For the first time in their entire marriage, Nathaniel Ashford was the one who was afraid. She wanted him to feel it. She wanted him to feel what she had felt every single day for 8 years. The taste of it, the metallic tang at the back of the throat, the cold sweat, the way the world narrows to a single point, and that point is the person who has power over you. She let him feel it for 10 long seconds. Then she lowered the gun. "You're not worth the bullet," Sarah said, "and you're not worth my soul." She turned her back on him. She walked to Jack. She handed him the revolver. "Tie him up," Sarah said. "We're taking him to town." Jack looked at her. Bloody face, steady hands, eyes that burned with something hotter than hate, something that hate couldn't touch because it came from deeper down. "Yes, ma'am," Jack said. He tied Nathaniel Ashford with the same rope that had bound Sarah's hands. He tied him tight. He pulled him to his feet and marched him outside where the moonlight made the world silver and the air tasted like copper and dust and the beginning of something new. They loaded Nathaniel onto a horse, his hands tied to the saddle horn. He had stopped screaming. He had stopped threatening. He rode in silence, a man who had finally run out of power. Halfway back to town, they met Morrison and his ranch hands riding hard in the opposite direction. Morrison let out a whistle when he saw Nathaniel tied to the horse. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "He's got a lot to answer for," Jack said. "We need to lock him up before sunrise. Cole won't arrest him. He will tonight." They reached Copper Bend at 3 in the morning. The town was dark and silent. Jack rode straight to the jailhouse and pounded on the door until Sheriff Cole appeared in his long underwear, bleary-eyed and confused. Cole looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Sarah's bloody face. He looked at the rope. "Lord Almighty," he whispered. "He kidnapped her from Morrison's ranch," Jack said. "Paid 2 men to do it. Took her to the mine, tied her to a chair, and put a gun in her face. And while he was at it, he confessed to killing Eli Foster and burying him in Shaft 4. Cole went white. He said that in front of 2 witnesses who are probably halfway to the next territory by now. Jack continued. "But Sarah heard it. I heard it. And you're going to lock him up, Sheriff. And this time you're going to do your damn job." Cole stood there for a long moment. The weight of years of cowardice pressed down on him, visible in the slump of his shoulders and the shame in his eyes. Then he straightened up. He took Nathaniel by the arm. "Come on, Nathaniel," he said. "You can't do this to me, Henry. My father will—" "Your father can take it up with the judge." Cole pulled Nathaniel inside. The cell door clanged shut. The lock turned. Sarah stood outside the jailhouse listening to the sound of that lock. It was a small sound, metal on metal, but to her it was the loudest thing she had ever heard, louder than his fists, louder than his voice, louder than 8 years of silence. Jack stood beside her. "It's done," he said. "No," Sarah said quietly. "It's not done. It's starting." She was right. There would be a trial. There would be testimony. There would be Nathaniel's lawyers and Nathaniel's money and the long, grinding machinery of a justice system that had never been built to protect women like her. It would be hard. It would be ugly. Some days she would want to give up. But not tonight. Tonight, Nathaniel Ashford was behind bars and Sarah Bennett was standing in the street, free, bleeding, and unbroken. She reached for Jack's hand. He took it, and they stood together in the dark street of Copper Bend, two damaged people holding on to each other, while the first pale light of dawn began to bleed across the eastern sky. And neither one of them let go. The sun rose fully over Copper Bend, casting long shadows across Main Street. By mid-morning, word had spread through the town like wildfire. Nathaniel Ashford, the man whose family had built this place, sat in a cell. And Sarah Bennett, the woman they'd all failed, had put him there. Jack and Sarah were at Pearl's boarding house drinking coffee and trying to process the weight of what had happened when they heard the sound of hooves on the street. Elias Washington rode into town at noon, his horse lathered and blowing hard, and he carried a leather satchel strapped across his chest like a man carrying dynamite. He found Jack at Pearl's boarding house and dropped the satchel on the kitchen table. "Doctor, Fleming had everything," Elias said, pouring himself water and drinking it in one long pull. "Medical records, signed witness statements from Whitfield, diagrams of Sarah's injuries dated and annotated. The man had kept copies of copies. He'd been waiting 3 years for someone to come ask for them." Jack opened the satchel. Inside were pages and pages of meticulous documentation, drawings of bruise patterns, notes on fracture types, a signed affidavit from Dr. Whitfield describing the night his office was ransacked, and the men who did it, men he recognized as Ashford mine employees. "There's more," Elias said. He pulled a sealed envelope from inside his shirt. "Dr. Fleming wrote a letter to Judge Hartford personally. He's willing to travel to Copper Bend and testify under oath." Pearl sat down heavily. "Lord," she said, "we might actually win this." "We're not winning anything yet," Jack said. "Nathaniel's been in that cell less than 12 hours. His family has money. Money buys lawyers. Lawyers buy time." "Then we don't give them time," Sarah said. She had been standing in the doorway listening. Her face was swollen. The cut above her eye had been stitched shut by Pearl with a sewing needle and whiskey, a frontier surgery that Sarah had endured without a sound. Her broken arm was resplinted. She looked like she'd been dragged behind a horse, but she was standing and her voice was clear. "Where is Judge Hartford now?" Sarah asked. "Helena," Elias said. "He rides circuit. Next stop is supposed to be Copper Bend in 4 weeks. 4 weeks is too long," Sarah said. "Nathaniel's father still has connections. Old Henry Ashford is sick, but he's not dead, and he has friends in the territorial government. If they get word to Helena before the judge leaves, they could have Nathaniel released on bond and the case reassigned to a friendly court." Jack looked at her. "How do you know all this?" "Because I lived in that house for 8 years, Jack. I wasn't just getting beaten. I was listening. I heard every conversation Nathaniel had with his father, every deal, every bribe, every threat. I know how they operate." "Then what do you suggest?" "We don't wait for the judge to come to us," Sarah said. "We go to him." Pearl shook her head. "Honey, you can barely stand." "I can ride. I've been riding since I was 12. My father taught me." "Sarah Helena is 4 days. 3 if you push it." Sarah looked at Elias. "You made it in 3 days." 2.5, Elias said. "Nearly killed the horse, though." "We take a wagon," Sarah said. "Slower, but we can carry the documents and I can rest between shifts." She looked around the room. "Nathaniel expects me to hide, expects me to run away and disappear. He doesn't expect me to ride to the territorial capital and put a case file on a federal judge's desk." Jack stood up. "I'm going with you." "I know." "Someone needs to stay here," Pearl said. "Watch Nathaniel. Make sure Cole doesn't lose his nerve and let him out." "I'll stay," Elias said. "Morrison's boys will help. We'll keep that cell door shut." "Pearl," Sarah said, "I need you to do something for me, something hard." "Name it." "Talk to the women, Mrs. Patterson, Clara Doss if you can reach her. Any woman in this town Nathaniel hurt or threatened or silenced. Tell them what happened. Tell them about the judge, and ask them if they're willing to talk." Pearl's eyes glistened. "Some of them are scared, Sarah." "I know. I was scared too. But scared and silent is how he wins. Scared and talking is how we win." Pearl reached across the table and took Sarah's good hand. She squeezed it hard. "You've changed, girl." "No," Sarah said. "I just stopped hiding." They left before dawn. Jack drove the wagon. Sarah sat beside him wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat, because her body ached in ways that went deeper than temperature. The satchel of documents sat between them like a third passenger. The first day was agony. Every rut in the road jolted Sarah's broken arm. Every bounce sent pain shooting through the bruises covering her torso. She gritted her teeth and said nothing. But Jack saw her knuckles go white on the wagon rail, and he slowed the horses. "Don't slow down," Sarah said. "You're hurting." "I've been hurting for 8 years. A few more days won't kill me." "Sarah." "Jack Rivers. If you stop this wagon, I will climb down and walk to Helena. Drive." He drove. They camped that night by a creek. Jack built a small fire and heated beans and coffee. Sarah ate with her good hand, chewing slowly because her jaw was sore from Nathaniel's last backhand. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Always." "When this is over, when the judge does whatever he's going to do, what happens to us?" Jack poked the fire with a stick. "What do you want to happen?" "I asked you first." "I know what I want," Jack said. "But it doesn't matter what I want until you're free. You've spent 8 years having a man decide your life. I'm not going to be the next man who does that." "What if I'm asking you to—" "You're not. You're asking me what I want. That's different. That's a conversation between equals." Sarah looked at him across the fire. "You really believe that I'm your equal?" "I believe you're a hell of a lot tougher than me. Does that count?" She almost smiled. "Margaret really trained you well with that skillet." Jack laughed. A real laugh, full and warm, and the sound of it filled the night in a way the fire couldn't. Sarah set down her plate. "I want to be free, Jack. That's the first thing. I want the law to say I'm not his property anymore. I want my name back. Sarah Bennett, not Sarah Ashford. Bennett. My father's name." She paused. "And then I want to decide what comes next, without someone telling me what it has to be. Maybe I'll stay in Copper Bend. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll teach. My father was a teacher, and I'm good with letters and numbers. There are children in that town who can't read." "Women, too," Jack said. "Pearl mentioned it once. Half the women in Copper Bend never learned." "Then I'll teach them all," Sarah said. "All of them. And I'll do it in Pearl's boarding house, and I'll do it for free. And Nathaniel can rot in a cell knowing the woman he tried to keep stupid is making the whole town smarter." Jack grinned. "That's a fine revenge." "It's not revenge. It's purpose. There's a difference." "I know there is." They reached Helena on the 3rd day. The territorial capital was overwhelming after weeks in Copper Bend. Sarah had never been to a city this size. People everywhere. Noise. Movement. But she set her jaw and walked into the federal courthouse like she owned it. Judge William Hartford was a lean man in his 60s with silver hair and the sharp, patient eyes of someone who had spent 40 years separating truth from lies. He sat behind his desk and listened. Sarah talked for 2 hours. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She laid out every detail with the precision of a schoolteacher's daughter, organizing 8 years of horror into a case that even the most skeptical jurist couldn't dismiss. She presented Dr. Whitfield's medical records. She described each injury, when it happened, what she had said to provoke it, which was always nothing, and what Nathaniel had said afterward. She told him about Eli Foster, about Clara Doss, about Dr. Whitfield's office, about the night at the mine shack. Jack corroborated what he had witnessed. The street, Pearl's boarding house, Morrison's ranch. Judge Hartford read every document. He asked questions, hard questions. The kind of questions designed to test the truth, not challenge it. When Sarah finished, Hartford was quiet for a long time. He removed his spectacles and cleaned them with his handkerchief, a gesture Sarah would later learn meant he was deeply disturbed. "Mrs. Ashford," Hartford said. "Miss," Sarah corrected. "My name is Sarah Bennett." Hartford looked at her over his spectacles. A hint of respect flickered across his weathered face. "Miss Bennett, in my 30 years on the bench I have heard many cases of domestic cruelty. I have heard them, and to my shame I have often been constrained by laws that do not adequately protect women in your situation." Sarah's heart sank. "You can't help us." "I didn't say that. I said the laws are inadequate, but the charges you're bringing aren't limited to domestic matters. Kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit murder, the death of Eli Foster, the arson of Clara Doss's business, the destruction of medical records." Hartford put his spectacles back on. "These are criminal charges, Miss Bennett. Federal criminal charges, given that the mine operates under territorial jurisdiction, and those charges I can prosecute." "When?" Sarah breathed. "I will advance my circuit schedule. I can be in Copper Bend within a week." "A week?" "Additionally." Hartford opened a drawer and pulled out a form. "I am issuing an immediate order of protection. Nathaniel Ashford is to remain incarcerated pending trial. No bond, no release. Any attempt by local authorities to release him will be met with federal contempt charges." He signed the document, stamped it, and handed it to Sarah. Sarah held the paper. Her hands shook not from fear this time, but from something she barely recognized because she had felt it so rarely. Relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me, Miss Bennett. Thank yourself. You rode 3 days with a broken arm to sit in this chair and tell me the truth. That took more courage than most men I've seen in this courtroom." Back in Copper Bend, Pearl had been busy. Over the 6 days that Sarah was traveling to Helena and back, Pearl had done exactly what Sarah asked. She had talked to the women. She had talked to Mrs. Patterson, who had watched the beatings from her window for years and was finally willing to speak. She had sent a telegram to Clara Doss in Billings. Clara agreed to travel back and testify about the arson. She had reached out to Eli Foster's widow living in Bozeman. The woman agreed to come back and testify about her husband's accident that wasn't an accident. She had spoken to 3 women from the mine camp whose husbands had witnessed Nathaniel ordering the shaft 4 supports to be weakened. 11 women in total. 11 women who had been afraid and were now choosing to speak. When Sarah returned to Copper Bend with Judge Hartford's order of protection, Pearl handed her a letter. "This came from Clara," Pearl said. Sarah read it aloud. "Dear Miss Pearl, I heard what Sarah did. I heard she said no. I want you to know I've been saying no in my head every day since I left Copper Bend. I never had the courage to say it out loud. Sarah said it for all of us. I'm coming home. Clara." Sarah pressed the letter against her chest. She didn't cry. She was done crying. What she felt was bigger than tears. It was the feeling of a stone thrown into water and the ripples reaching the shore. Judge Hartford arrived in Copper Bend 6 days later with 2 federal marshals and a court stenographer. He set up in the town hall. The trial lasted 3 days. Sarah testified on the first day. She sat in the witness chair for 4 hours. She described everything, every beating, every broken bone, every night spent lying awake calculating whether she would survive until morning. She described Eli Foster and the mine shaft. She described Clara Doss and the fire. She described the night at the mine shack, the rope, the gun, and Nathaniel's confession. Nathaniel's lawyer, a man brought in from Butte at great expense, tried to discredit her. He called her hysterical. He called her an adulteress. He suggested she had fabricated the injuries to justify running away with another man. Sarah looked the lawyer dead in the eye. "I have 17 documented injuries over 8 years signed by a licensed physician," she said. "I have 11 witnesses. I have a confession spoken in front of 2 hired men. And I have this." She held up her broken arm, still in its splint. "Your client did this because I was 5 minutes late from church. Would you like me to show the court what he did when I was 10 minutes late?" The courtroom went silent. On the second day, the women of Copper Bend testified. One by one, they stood up and told their stories. Mrs. Patterson, who had watched from her window. The miners' wives who had heard their husbands talk about Shaft 4. Clara Doss, who had traveled 3 days from Billings to sit in that chair. Eli Foster's widow, who had come back from Bozeman. On the third day, Judge Hartford delivered his verdict. Nathaniel Ashford was found guilty of assault, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and involuntary manslaughter in the death of Eli Foster. He was sentenced to 25 years in the Territorial Prison. As the marshals led Nathaniel out of the courtroom, he passed Sarah. He stopped. The marshals let him stop just for a moment. "You destroyed me," Nathaniel whispered. "No," Sarah said. "You destroyed yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after you." The marshals took him away. Sarah walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon sun. The street was full of people, the same street where she had knelt in the dirt with blood on her lip, the same people who had looked away. They weren't looking away now. Pearl was there. Elias was there. Morrison was there, leaning on his cane, nodding. Clara Doss stood in the crowd crying quietly. Mrs. Patterson held her children's hands and met Sarah's eyes for the first time in 8 years. And Jack was there standing in the street right where he had stood the first day when he swung down from his horse and placed himself between Sarah and the fist. Sarah walked toward him. She stopped an arm's length away. "You're staring at me?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "Because the last time I stood in this spot, you were on your knees," Jack said. "Now you're standing up, and I want to remember what that looks like." Sarah closed the distance. She reached up with her good hand and touched his face, tracing the scar from his temple to his jaw. He closed his eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for standing in the street that day. I'd do it 1,000 times. I know, but you won't have to, because I'm standing in the street now." She kissed him right there in the middle of Main Street, in the middle of Copper Bend, Montana, in the summer of 1878, in front of God and the whole town. It wasn't a long kiss. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. It was a quiet, deliberate, chosen kiss. The first kiss Sarah Bennett had given freely since the day she was born. When she pulled back, Jack's eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He let them be. "About that dinner," he said. "Tuesday," Sarah said. 6 o'clock. Don't be late." "I'm never late." "I know. That's why I picked you." 6 months later, Sarah Bennett opened the first schoolhouse in Copper Bend. She taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to 23 women and 14 children. Pearl donated the back room of the boarding house until the new building was finished. Elias supervised the construction. Morrison donated the lumber. Jack stayed. Not because she asked him to, because he chose to. He worked Morrison's ranch, and he rode into town every evening, and he sat at Sarah's table and ate whatever she cooked. And it was never beef and beans, and it was always the best thing he'd ever tasted. He never raised his hand to her. He never raised his voice. When they disagreed, and they disagreed often because Sarah Bennett had opinions about everything and the vocabulary to back them up, they argued like equals and forgave like partners. The house they built together at the edge of town had a lock on every door, and Sarah kept every key. The copper mine stayed open. Sarah organized the finances until a proper manager was hired from Butte. The miners kept their jobs. The town kept its livelihood. And the people of Copper Bend learned something that no mine could produce and no amount of money could buy. They learned that the woman they had watched get beaten in the street, the woman they had turned away from, the woman they had dismissed as Nathaniel Ashford's property, was the one who saved them all. Not with a gun, not with a fist, with a voice. Years later, when travelers passed through Copper Bend and asked about the schoolhouse with the hand-painted sign that read, Bennett Academy, the old-timers would tell the story. They'd tell it different ways depending on how much whiskey they'd had, but the bones of it were always the same. They'd say a cowboy rode into town one summer day and saw a woman on her knees in the dirt. They'd say he stepped off his horse and stood in the gap. They'd say she stood up. They'd say she never got back down. And if you asked Sarah about it, she'd set down her chalk and look at you with those green eyes that had seen hell and come back from it, and she'd say the same thing every time. Freedom isn't something someone gives you. It's something you take. And the first step is always the hardest, because the first step is believing you deserve it. Then she'd pick up her chalk and turn back to the blackboard, and the children would watch her write, and the letters would march across the slate in straight, strong lines. The handwriting of a woman who had learned that the most powerful weapon in the world wasn't a fist or a gun or a bag of gold. It was a voice that refused to be silenced. And Sarah Bennett's voice rang through that schoolhouse, and through that town, and through the years that followed, clear and strong and unbroken, like a bell that had finally learned to ring.